Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, come inside.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Expat Conversations with your host, Michael Nolen. I want to say once again, this is a show that is sponsored by the University of Guadalajara Institute of Investigation, Innovation, and Governance, which is controlled by Dr. Marco Antonio Cortez Gradado, the former General Rector at the University of Guadalajara. So I want to say thank you to him for allowing us to have the show. Also, I want to give a very, very special shout out to the Hotel Villa Monte Carlo here in the west end of Chapala, who allows us to film here at their beautiful location. If you're coming down to the Chapala area and you need somewhere to stay or have an event, it's getting ready to be summertime, so they've got a beautiful, beautiful pool, pickleball courts, all kinds of thermal water spas. So if you need a place to come down and hang out for a day or a week or somewhere to live for a while, this is a great place. So thank you for tuning in. Today I have a very, very special guest, David Truly. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You got it right, Mike.
David, thank you very much for being on.
My pleasure.
This young man here to my right probably knows more about the Lake Chapala area and the history of it than anybody I've ever met. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this area. It's a beautiful place to live. It's a beautiful place to visit. There's some great, great things about it. I think the weather's probably one of the best.
Yep.
But there's some other things. So please, David, if you would give a short bio, and then kind of let's just talk about the Lake Chapala area and what you know, the history, and where we're at, you know, from your knowledge of long, long, long time ago all the way up to the present.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me to be here. I came here in '97 to do my work on a dissertation at the University of South Carolina. I've been doing some work on international retirement migration, and while I appreciate Michael saying I know the most, I have to tip my hat to Mr. Tony Burton from Canada, who has written, he's written tons around this area. I depended on a lot of his research earlier, but my research really looked at kind of developing and understanding the typology of the types of people that came here to understand more about international retirement migration, the demographic and kind of psychographic profiles of the people that came. And it was totally fascinating in '97 when I came here. It was very different than it is today. And a lot of the people that I interviewed at that time, little old ladies and people that had been retired here for probably 20, 30 years, and school teachers and people like this that had settled here on small pensions and really had to kind of integrate into the local community. But it created a very symbiotic relationship, which has been part of the history of this whole region. And for me, before I embarked on all this, I was a musician for years and on nightclubs, and then I got my PhD at the University of South Carolina. But I'd always had a fascination for Mexico, and so my wife and I, we'd taken our honeymoon throughout Mexico. On our way back, we'd heard about this place. I'd been down in the Chiapas region working on my master's degree, which was on ethnic tourism development down in the Chiapas, Lacandon region. And we'd heard about this place, and people said, there's these expats living there and stuff. And at that time, a lot of people were writing things about ecotourism, but nobody really looking at this international retirement migration process. And it just started. And really, I think what we see today and what I've seen over the last decades is just the incredible amount of development and promotion for international retirement migration. We've seen Europeans, which have done this quite a lot, from like the Brits and the Swedes, who would go down to the Algarve coast and down to a Mediterranean area to get out of the winters. And then we started to see this, certainly snowbirds in the United States, but generally would just go down to the southern, like the Florida or Texas, to get out of the winter. But the development of the international retirement industry in the sense of its promotion, things like International Living, magazines like that, websites. I mean, nowadays, I can't even, at one point, I had a student help me look at all the different websites. I wouldn't even try to do that now because there's so many.
Oh, yeah.
And there's so many YouTube sites of people that, live here cheaply, leave here this, and discover this area. And the reality is that it has turned into huge global industry. And there's been benefits, without a doubt. And there's been some negative impacts that what we see, not just here, but in many parts of the world that have kind of attracted this international retirement. Because in a way, it's the best of both worlds, because you're bringing, like tourism, is a great industry still, but we know about the impacts of that, how it can lead to issues in certain areas. And one of the big factors about this is that while we bring in all these people with tourism, it's changing all the time. And so it's kind of up, you get this seasonal flow, which is something you don't want. And retirement migration generally brings people that have fixed incomes, and they're not going to usually seek out employment. So there develops a service industry to cater to them. And so because of that, it creates a very good economic funnel for local communities, job opportunities, and this is what has, seen the miraculous growth in states like Florida and Texas in certain parts, and Arizona, New Mexico. Again, what happens over time, and if you go into the international retirement migration process, a lot of countries saw this, Costa Rica, and they did a lot of incentives to attract foreigners. Mexico, other places have done it. As of recently, Portugal has become a very hot spot.
Yes.
And they did a lot of incentives, but you see one thing in common with all of them, and at some point they get rid of those incentives because it becomes too much. And it starts to see some of the negative impacts.
Well, I know that since the invention of the internet, and especially the pandemic, so many more people are coming down here that are younger, that can work from anywhere. And so, we used to have the snowbirds.
Right.
Like you said, people coming up from Canada and the winter people coming down to get away from the cold. Well, now it's kind of, you have what they call the sunbirds too. A lot of people that are in the hot areas like Phoenix and Palm Desert and Palm Springs and South Texas, they're coming down because we're at about 5,200 feet altitude.
Right.
It's cooler. The temperature is not, there's not really hurricanes, there's no earthquakes, there's no tornadoes. It's pretty climate is very nice.
Right.
And people can work from anywhere. So I've seen a lot of younger people starting to come down here year round. And some of them are staying permanently, and then some are just, 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Right.
But it does cause a lot of negative problems sometimes. Like I think the number one is probably the cost of real estate. It's just kind of priced all the local people out.
Well, it used to be, and I always worried about this when I first came down and the years I studied. And the reality is I became actually one of my own study subjects. On my sabbatical from the university when I was teaching in Connecticut, we came down, my wife and I, and our kids were 18 months and about 3 years old. And my wife figured out that, hell, she could have a nanny and a maid for, relatively low amount of money. And we loved the idea of raising our kids in a foreign country, so they'd be bilingual and bicultural. And so we stayed here, and I went back and forth for a while until we permanently settled here. And it was a great decision. And I think there's always been that select group of people that seek out international living. Mm-hmm. I think the rise of, the digital nomads, as they kind of call them, has created a whole nother marketplace that it's kind of come up. And like you say, the negative aspects is, as real estate markets in the States just went bonkers expensive, people then figured, I can sell this and I can buy something great down here. Well, I remember when I first came down here in 97, I think, I remember one house that I remember, and I always check on what the price of that house may be. And back then, this was a fairly nice house down in the village, and I think it was like $87,000. I think that house right now, probably, if you tried to buy it, would probably be close to $400,000 or $500,000.
I got a good friend moved here 6 years ago, bought a house for $90,000, did about $20,000 worth of renovation. He's selling it now for $380,000.
Right, and that's a good thing he sells it soon, because I tell you what is beginning to happen is you've seen a massive amount of new construction everywhere.
That's true.
And yet the problem is, like a lot of little towns where these type of things happens, infrastructure stress is unbelievable. The traffic congestion is really bad, and there's not a lot of alternatives for building roads unless you start blowing holes.
No, when you have the biggest body of water in Mexico on the south side, and you have mountains on the north side, you can't go with one main street.
Right.
And it runs from Ahihi all the way to Hohotopec.
Right. And then they probably didn't anticipate the fact that also It was a very advantageous time for Americans to buy with the peso currency. Now, I mean, the peso a few years ago was 22 pesos to the dollar. Now it's floating around 16.
Yeah, at the pandemic, it got up to 24.60.
Right.
And now I checked yesterday, it was 16.40.
Right.
So it goes up and down, but it's. I remember when I first started coming down here around 2000, it was 11
Yeah.
to 1.
Right.
So it's gone up, it's gone down. That's good and the bad and the ugly. But,
Yeah, and I mean, I think what it does too is I think it as more and more people come, as and you mentioned the websites earlier, and I think there's been a real big push by people who want to make and can make money off their social media sites and selling it. And a lot of times they just want to promote the positives. They're often in cahoots with real estate people or real estate people. And I mentioned years ago to real estate people, you know, when I give just talks and they'd say, well, how do we get the wealthier clients down here? And I said, well, they'll come eventually. But now the problem is you've got a lot of clients that come down here that are part-timers. And they come and they may have another home somewhere else. And so you've developed now the problem we've seen a lot of tourist reasons. We got these sloping seasons. You'll have a high season and then a slow season. Back when I came in the late 90s and even through the earlier times, most of the people who came here were not particularly wealthy. They were more middle class, but they were willing to live down here. And this was obviously, a lot of this was prior to NAFTA. So they couldn't go down and get Jiffy peanut butter at Walmart. They couldn't. That probably signaled the biggest shift in the demographics and the psychographics of people once they could get American products. Because before that, people didn't have that. So when they were down here, they had to live like they lived here, and they really had to adapt more to the culture. That has shifted. And then this is what you see in a lot of international retirement destinations. And countries and locals and officials get concerned as they start to see their culture being a little bit manipulated and changed, and the impacts of these foreigners, the impacts. And it's, you know, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people come down here that do a lot of great things. And I think one of the things that separates the Lake Chapala Society from other destinations is this has always been a place where because like the Lake Chapala Society, its history of philanthropy and charitable organizations has always been in a place where there was a outreach, and even people down here that would come, they would hire local people to the gardeners, and they'd then help send that kid to school. And I mean, that's a tradition that's been going on here for decades and decades.
Well, I know I've had the Rotary, the American Legion,
Sure.
Several of the Rotary clubs, American Legion. I've had a lot of the charitable organizations, Red Cross, on my show, and you're right. There's so many people come down here, and there's only so much you can do down here, and they get a little bored, so they start reaching out and helping the local community, and it's amazing how it just dominoes.
Yeah,
and people get involved, and I know people involved in 3 or 4 different organizations or groups. Really helping out the local communities, and that's a positive.
And that's one of the things that I think that makes this place unique, because there are so many different avenues for doing that. Of course, one of the problems with any kind of volunteer organization too is, and as we are living in a place that, you know, a lot of people, they're elderly and they do pass away, is then, you know, the leadership of those things sometimes shifts kind of abruptly, and it's hard to kind of keep things going. But the reality is there are a lot of those opportunities, and I would always tell people, you know, because there's always, when people retire, there's always this idea of kind of, there's a honeymoon phase. And I always remember telling this story when I did lectures of a gentleman I met who just came down, and I used to play in a band now with some guys down here called the Tall Boys, and people, and this guy would come out and hear us all the time, and everybody would be dancing and partying and having fun. And I saw him and I interviewed him, and he was having a great time. And I saw him about a year later in the plaza, and he didn't look particularly cheery. And I sat down, I just asked him why so glum, and he said, well, I've just been to the doctor. And well, I was a little concerned that he's got some disease or something. And he goes, no, he said, I'm fine. He says, man, I can live to I can live to 85 or 90 years old. And I go, okay, so what's the point? He said, dude, that's like another career. What am I going to do for 20 years or 25 years? And you know, and that's when I said, well, that's when that happy hour mentality, or that just kind of that honeymoon period of it. Then it's like, what do you do? And like, you know, some people turn to painting, and some people turn to writing, or There's a lot of people down here who play music, or they get involved with the organizations and charities, and that is one of the things that's super important, because we see that in a lot of retirement communities. If people don't have outlets to do things, because keeping busy and doing things is important, and that's one of the things that's make this area, I think, so attractive. And the Lake Chapala Society, considered to be the oldest kind of expat foreign community in the world, which is one of the reasons I decided to study this location. It's been there for a long time, so it's always been that kind of open door for foreigners coming down. And it certainly in the early days played an important role when there's difficult to get around. And nowadays you have services for all of those type of things. There's enough lawyers and bankers and everything else now to take care of everybody, right? But they weren't back then, and so it was a different game. So it's kind of fascinating. But I think Lake Chapala, it's experienced a lot of growth, and I think my biggest concern down here now is the kind of overbuilding that's going on, because in the United States just recently, we're going through this right now. Real estate just unbelievably grew so fast, but prices priced out first-time owners. I mean, kids can't buy a home in most places. And the other thing that's going to have an impact is, it used to be 6% was the commission rate. Well, there was a big lawsuit in the United States, and they got done away with that. And a lot of people who come down here always complain about the 6%. Well, the real estate agents were able to kind of say that, well, the 6%, that's what we do, and that's not going to be anymore. And I think as these prices get higher, and if the supply begins to get higher than the demand because of the pricing of the homes, you're going to see that start to shift. I remember in 2008 when they had the real estate bubble in the United States, people that bought homes here at kind of inflated prices, some of them waited 5 to 10 years to sell their house to get their money back. So it's not a given. This has been, if you look at the history of this place over decades, you'll always see a little bit of a boom and bust cycle. And a lot of that goes with the peso valuation, real estate evaluation, some of the political aspects that affect things, but these, it's just the nature of the beast. So there's always a little bit more of a risk, as always. And whenever people ask me about moving here or anywhere, I said, you rent for a while to see if it meets your needs.
That's the smartest advice that I can ever give anybody. Come down, don't just buy something the first weekend. Move down here, rent for 3 or 4 months, find out an opportunity where you want to be, if it fits your needs. I've got a really good friend, and I was in Puerto Vallarta for 6 years, and it's a much different group of people. It's much more active. You got surfing, you got boating, you got golf, 12 golf courses, you got deep sea fishing, you got all kinds of nightclubs and bars. Over here it's quieter, it's more peaceful, it's not quite as physically active. But Sheila was over there for about 6 or 7 years, very involved in the communities and organizations, charities, but it just wasn't fitting her lifestyle. She wasn't happy. So she recently moved over here about 6 months ago and just loves the change.
Right.
She just really, really enjoys it. And so if you're over here and it's not great for you, maybe you can move back over. San Miguel Aliente, Puerto Vallarta. There's a lot of expat communities.
And listen,
with a lot of Americans and Europeans and Canadians living in them all over Mexico. And you mentioned cost of stuff. One thing we talked about earlier is taxes. We both lived in Houston for a while.
Right.
$6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a year for property taxes.
Okay.
Down here on a house comparable to what I had in Houston, last year I paid, I think, $120 for the year, property taxes, versus the $6,000 or something in California, Oregon, Washington.
Sure.
So that's where people can come down here, and plus domestic services, maids, gardeners, landscapers, construction type people. You save a lot of money on that type of
and I think it used to be, and I think still compared to larger urban areas, certainly going out and stuff is cheaper. Although that's shifted a lot too.
Yeah, food's gone up.
Food's gone up, and so I went out the other day and I realized I paid about the same as I paid in Smithville, Texas, a little town outside of Austin, that I did for my dinner here. But you're right, the services and the taxation. The other thing people have to realize, though, is because of the climate here and the sun and the rainy season, your houses need pretty much yearly maintenance.
That's true.
And the services, but one of the other issues that's happened is a lot of the local people, like you mentioned earlier, do get priced out of places to stay nearby. Mm-hmm. And, I remember I lived in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina for a long time. I had a nightclub there. And when that was booming as a tourist destination, it was easy. There people had a place to live, but as it's grown over time, now they have to bus in people from off the island because they kind of get priced out. So, and these are things that we happen, and it's not just endemic to here. This is what happens in all of these places, and it's always been difficult because governments, there is a lot of advantages, the taxes and the employment opportunities, but it's that fine line where it gets a little too much and it starts to tip it and it gets tough. And I think this destination is feeling that a little bit. San Miguel de Allende went through that years ago, and it's a little different because it's a larger city, more of an international destination, but and a little more tourist oriented, so it's a little different. But all these places, and there's so many of these international retirement destinations that are competing for these people now, like Portugal, and I know a lot of people I met here had already or were planning to visit, like Panama at the time was
Panama,
big. Belize, and Ecuador, not so much Ecuador anymore because they're having problems. I mean, this is it too. Places change.
That's true.
And the political realities of places, once governments feel like, wow, there's too many here, then they change it. I know here in Mexico, the rates for the amount of income you have to show have gone.
That's gone up quite a bit.
Quite a bit, to the point where, and the sad thing about that, I think, is I think the governments, I think what they have to remember is that a lot of these people historically, a lot of people in the kind of middle were the ones that stayed here all the time. They were full-timers. They might leave for a month in May or June. But now we have a lot more second, third homeowners,
That's true.
Wealthy people. And so they'll come at seasons. And the problem is, for business owners, you want to have steady clientele. And when somebody comes for 6 months and gone for 6 months, you just lost that table.
That's true.
And then that gets a little more difficult. But I think as people start to, what I have noticed is like scheduling events and festivities maybe in kind of what are being off-season times to kind of stimulate other people to come is a way you can kind of offset that.
Well, I know Vallarta did a lot of that. They had some of their bigger events in the off seasons,
right?
And that's get people in.
And that's something we did in tourism development when I was working at the University in Connecticut, CCSU. We did that with tourism. We help towns. What can we do? Okay, you're going to have a lot of people in the summer. What are you going to do in the fall and the spring? What can you do? In Hilton Head Island, we had a lot of summertime visitors. Once we had the golf courses, then we started advertising for spring golfers, a lot of convention golf events and conventions. And you start to build those, what they call shoulder seasons at that time. And I think that's kind of, all these places are going to feel it. So it's a fascinating thing. And I think the people that come in, you have different types of people, different expectations. And I always tell them, I think it's important for you to do your homework a little bit, come down, rent, check out some other places, see what one fits for you, and realize that, it is, whenever you invest in anything, anywhere, it's always a certain degree of added risk, because you're in another country, things can change.
That's true.
And I think, the other thing that a lot of people that I've been noticing, I think probably one of the biggest factor is our entire shift in our mindset towards what a home is. It used to be you bought a home and you lived there with your family 30, 40, 50 years. And you paid off that mortgage. Over the last few decades, housing has become an investment vehicle with Airbnb and all these things.
That's true.
And that's been a problem in Austin. Neighborhoods, it used to be neighborhoods. The people said, we don't want Airbnb because the neighborhood's gone.
That's true.
And I think that, I know down here, Airbnbs now, a lot of countries are dealing with how do we balance that out and how do hotels compete with. So it's a dynamic situation. And I think it's the idea that, I'm going to jump in here and I can turn around and, you're right, people have made money selling things. But like I said, after the 28 crash, people didn't,
You make a lot of money on something if you owned it 5, 6, 7 years ago. But where are you going to go then? Because where you're going to go to is gone way, way up too.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think that's... It's a continually, you just have to find your place in it. And like I said, I've seen a lot of people that have lived here for years and have gone back to the States and found a little town in, Arizona and New Mexico. And, there's other factors. I mean, I think the, healthcare, particularly routine healthcare down here, has always been a benefit. Like people that need, constant checking or blood work or things.
Dental work, things like that.
Yeah.
A lot cheaper down here.
Yeah.
And good quality.
Yeah,
Really
exactly.
good quality,
And so that attracts a lot of people, and I think but even that, I mean, hospitals down here and there's efforts to try, I remember I worked with some teams that were trying to get Medicare down here. And there are ways now that people can use some services like that, but it's a work in progress, and I think a lot of people, as they get elderly, some of them that have left here, a lot of times it's because of family and health.
That's true.
To get back closer so they can be somebody to kind of keep an eye on them and things like that. So
Exactly. Well, Dad, we've talked about a lot of stuff. I really want to say thank you. We could probably sit here for another couple hours.
Probably.
Time's kind of limited, and I just want to say thank you very much. Do you want to give out any contact information? You can or you don't have to, in case somebody wants to contact you. I don't want to invade on your privacy.
Yeah.
But, some people like to give it out, especially the charities and the organizations and individuals like VIPs, very important people, or very interesting people like yourself.
Right.
Just a conversation is a great show.
Right.
So
right. I you can find me if you want to email me. I don't mind answering emails at trulyd@gmail.com. Other than that, I do have a website up to David Truly, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't touched that sucker in a while. I'm kind of living outside of Austin, and as you know, my wife passed away not too long ago because of cancer.
We're sorry about that, yeah.
And I'm kind of these are things people ask me sometimes. Said, "Are you coming back to Mexico?" And I think that's something that people, I'm the kind of guy that I very seldom go back to the same place.
kind of like a Rolling Stone.
Yeah, pretty much, man.
And speaking of Rolling Stones, a great group. He mentioned earlier he was in a group called the Tall Boys. And I, unfortunately, was living in Puerto Vallarta when they were really, really going down here. But you can go to YouTube, Tall Boys,
there's some
and
stuff
find
on
some
there.
new shows. And I've watched them.
Yeah, there's some of the original guys that live here still, and they do little duos and stuff.
Unbelievable music group for down here. I guarantee if you really probably wanted, you could have gone pretty big on that stuff.
Well, and we had our moments in the sun.
Great following.
Yeah.
And still I hear about it down here from.
No, there's
I
some
wish we
people-
had a group like the Tall Boys here.
Yeah, I know.
Whatever.
They can't let it go.
Well.
It's all right. It was a great time. I have some of my best memories of my life are here. There's no doubt about it. And so when people talk about it, I always tell them it was my wife and I made the best decision of our lives to raise our kids here. They're both bilingual and bicultural, and I think it served them really well. And I think that is a bonus for people that do that type of thing. So.
Well, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time and energy to come over here and give out a little information. Like I said, we can talk for hours. But maybe we'll have you back on in 6 months or a year and cover something else a little bit different.
Sure.
But,
Sounds great.
Thank you, my friend.
Michael, my brother.
I appreciate
All right.
it. Well, thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Expat Conversations with Michael Nolen. We appreciate you tuning in today. And also, please pass it on to your friends and your neighbors. You never know who might want to watch the show and learn a little bit about not just David Truly and what he had to say today, but all the other shows I've had on. I think you can learn a little bit from everything, from all of them.
And I think people considering being an expat or moving someplace, doing your homework, listening to some people that come on these shows. And I think your show is, because it's sponsored by the university, I think there's a certain degree of objectiveness.
Well, there is an educational purpose. The university is there to educate people. I'm not trying to promote myself or a company or
I agree.
tell us like and subscribe. Some of my shows have had hundreds and hundreds of views. Some have like 20.
Yeah, well.
The ones I think are really going to do good. I don't know why people don't watch them. I had one guy come on, he was with Democrats abroad.
Yeah.
And this is a big election time and all that. I think like 20 people have watched that. And he said, I get thousands of people to watch it. Well, you never know.
You never know.
But people like yourself that are really interesting, that know the area and give out great advice is always beneficial. So thank you again. We appreciate it. And
all right.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Happy trails to you until